Hello and welcome to another Whisky Whisky review. This is what we've got today. It's James Cree's Cattle Ranch Whisky, which is a Tennessee bourbon whisky. So this one is not actually a whisky that I bought. It's not product placement or a giveaway or anything like that, because my dad bought this and he gifted almost the entire bottle to me because he really didn't like it, didn't get on with it at all. And I believe that he bought this from one of the UK supermarkets for just under £20, so it's a very cheap whisky. Interestingly though, if you look at the label on this, there's not a huge amount of information, apart from the fact that you have got a 4-year-old age statement, which is good for a bourbon, because quite often they're not that old, or they don't tell you how old. It is 40% ABV, but if you look at the back label, what's interesting to me is this one. It's actually got the name John Crabby & Co Limited on the back label. So I don't think that this is actually made by the John Crabby Whisky Company. So they're obviously the people behind Crabbies Ginger Wine and the newer like Crabbies Yardhead and the Crabby 15 that I had in the advent calendar recently. I suspect that it's probably not made by them. It probably is a sourced whisky. But I'm thinking that the fact that it is a John Crabby & Co product possibly means that this isn't widely available across the world, maybe not even available in America like most bourbon is. For anyone that's curious, James Cree, which I assume is the guy pictured on the top of the bottle, etched into the glass up there, he was actually a Scotsman who married into the Crabby family and moved to New Mexico to start a cattle ranch. And you'll also notice on the bottle there is a double V. Looks a bit like a printing error, but that's actually the cattle brand that James Cree used on his cattle when he went over to New Mexico. Now this is a product of Tennessee. I couldn't find any link between James Cree and Tennessee, so it may just be that this is where the whiskey is made and there isn't actually a local connection between James Cree and Tennessee. Didn't look too hard, but I couldn't find anything. But anyway, other information on the label. There's not a huge amount on the back, apart from it is a John Crabby product. There's some brief tasting notes. As I said, it is 4 years old, which is youngish, but not incredibly young for a bourbon, because bourbon can legally be unaged, and even straight bourbon can be 4 years old, or as young as 2 years old if they declare it on the label. I do also find it interesting that they call this a Tennessee bourbon whiskey, because it's kind of like they're directly mocking Jack Daniels and those Tennessee whiskey distilleries that have claimed for a long time that Tennessee whiskey is different to bourbon whiskey. The long and the short of it, Tennessee whiskey is almost exactly the same thing as bourbon whiskey, as they've kind of pointed out by calling this one a Tennessee whiskey and a bourbon whiskey, because it's both. So let's get some in the glass and see what you get for just under 20 UK pounds. So 40%, probably heavily filtered. Sourced product. Shouldn't really expect too much on the nose. I'm using my Old Pulteney glass today. Old Pulteney is a distillery that I've not been to. It's just a glass that I saw in a shop and liked it. Decided to buy it because I do like the Old Pulteney distillery, even though I'm yet to get there. So on the nose, quite sweet caramel, slightly nutty, a little bit of a popcorn bourbon, stereotypical bourbon note, quite a bit of citrus, some musty lime notes that I really like, and also quite a lot of grapefruit. Quite unusual for a bourbon, in my opinion, that there's lots of really musty citrus grapefruit notes on the nose, and I really like that. It makes it interesting. Let's see how it tastes. So on the palate, it is light. It perhaps has a little bit less body than your average bourbon, not as much of the cloying sweetness that a lot of Scotch drinkers, myself included, kind of object to in a lot of bourbons. It's not got that. But I'd say that as light as it is, being at 40%, it's probably got more body than you would expect out of most minimum strength bourbons. It's slightly simple, a little bit thin, but it's definitely not bland. Again, on the palate you've got lots of sweet caramel popcorn notes, a little bit of a spicy grassy rye note, and also a little bit of a herbaceous aldehydyl kind of cut grass note on the palate. And again, lots of that musty citrus, grapefruit, lemon and lime flavour, which I really like. As for the finish, kind of short, sweet and nutty, again with more of those lingering cut grass, grassy rye style notes. And that's also something else that really intrigued me about this one. I think if I was tasting this blind, I would almost bet money that this was a rye whiskey, or at least a high percentage of rye in the mash bill. I have done a little bit of basic research on this one, and the research that I've seen says that this is made with an 84% corn mash bill, so that's sweet corn or maize, so that's a pretty stereotypical bourbon mash bill. So unless that remaining 16% in the mash bill is some really punchy pure rye, I could just be completely wrong about the rye in this one, although me personally I'm getting quite a lot of those grassy, lemony rye flavours. I must admit that when I first got this bottle of whiskey and before I'd tried it, so I knew where it's from, it's a supermarket product, it's John Crabbies, it's 40%, it's a source product. I thought I probably won't bother to review it because I've reviewed I think a few sort of bottom shelf bourbons at this point, and I've reviewed quite a lot of supermarket whiskies, and I wasn't really in the mood to crap on another product where someone seems like they are actually trying, and I also didn't really want to have another review of a bourbon or a cheap whiskey where I just say it's not great, it's okay, but it's cheap, so it's kind of worthwhile. I didn't really want to do another one of those videos. And to be honest, this isn't an amazing whiskey. I think that if you're a hardened bourbon fanatic, if you're really into your high quality bourbons, this is absolutely not going to set your world ablaze. It's not the most exciting thing in the world. But I think with that citrus spice rye note, that really punchy, sharp lemon lime grapefruit quality, and especially if you're a Scotch drinker that likes to dabble with bourbon occasionally and you're looking for something cheap, all of those unusual notes mean that this is decent enough and different enough to be interesting, and also it is very cheap. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.